around, and then of course more life is added with a little crab right there. 2 dolphins currently jumping out of the water, which now means that we have to continue building the water area. And as I've mentioned earlier, I'm definitely not going to do that completely by myself, because otherwise this is the most repetitive and most annoying work by far. Therefore you can see us starting off with 2 guys working, and then for the next 3 base plates we were 4 people simultaneously building Lego, which was of course the fastest I've ever built Lego. And now 2 of the guys who also helped me build the water base plates also prepared this epic pirate ship. These are Rudy and Willy. They both competed in Lego Masters Germany, and there you can see these absolutely crazy building techniques. All the angles in this ship, you'll see that when we now start to add life to the ship as well. By the way, everything in this pirate ship is completely modular. In the center right there with these grid or net pieces right there, they can be simply detached from the rest of the ship, revealing the interior. The building technique of these grids is also absolutely incredible. It's simply made out of a turned around plate, then connected with 1 by 1 bricks in this case, in order to achieve this awesome grid effect right there. Really fun building technique. Of course, the anchor of the ship, just as it should be, can also be tucked in. Now the only thing we're not too sure about at the moment is if we should keep this yellow contrast color in the long run. Of course, at the moment the color scheme is heavily inspired by the old Lego pirate ships, but maybe we're going to exchange all the yellow touches around the ship with pearl gold. Back there at the cabin, once again, just take a look at these angles the guys have added. It's absolutely insane building technique wise. Of course, once again, everything is modular. And another thing we actually spent quite some time on designing and planning is whether we should have brick built sails or these sort of paper or fabric sails. But in the end we thought it was much more authentic to have real brick built sails, and therefore they of course are quite heavy but look absolutely incredible, and it's, as I've mentioned earlier, more authentic. Now all these ropes we've attached to the sails and the masts and so on are first of all to stabilize everything and hold the sails in place, but in the end you'll see that right now, as soon as I'm beginning to completely go crazy with the different ropes. And I don't know if it's just me, but I think these 2 hours I've spent connecting Lego strings from one mast and one sail to the other was absolutely worth it. I've really spent some time also researching where these ropes were attached back in the days with real sailing ships. By the way, the longer cords we used were from the old fire trucks from Lego, because they had 50-60 centimeter long cords right there, which was of course perfect. This is what the front of the ship looks like. Absolutely crazy. Once again, I of course can't show how exactly we've connected this, but just so you know, everything is built using these ball joints on the inside of the ship, which now means, since this is the first section of the Pirate Bay, which is then, by the way, going to be quadrupled in size within the next few months, but this is the first part of the Pirate Bay, which is going to be exhibited on top of the mountain over the next month, and therefore we have to cover up the edge of the entire MOC with simply a black frame. It looks so much cleaner, so much better, and therefore you can now for the first time get a look at what the first section of this MOC looks like. And although at this point this looks somewhat complete, just wait till the end of the video, because this will be completely dominated by the rest of the pirate world. For now, we needed to find a bigger space to continue building, and therefore next up we started to tackle the gap in the back right there. And for that we start off with the cliff for the mainland, where the fortress will be placed on top. We haven't included any transitions for the water this time, as this is a steep coast, so it doesn't really make any sense to indicate shallow water like we did it on the other island. The only thing we did is add some individual waves that roll towards the coast. The rest is once again then simply covered up with these trans light blue tiles. Now we're already getting to the first details. First, I used a small lasso, making the loop tighter so that it now fits on the pin that then holds up the minifigure head. You can already probably guess what I'm going for. This is now anchored underneath this rocky outcrop, and of course this entire scene is heavily inspired by Pirates of the Caribbean, where skeletons are hung up outside underneath the rocks to scare off pirates. We've however also built some more peaceful scenes, like a seagull nesting on a nearby rock right there. But for now I'd say let's move on to the details on the backside. And now you might wonder how exactly we are going to create details right there, because that's normally simply a clean wall. What we're now going to do is build small scenes in cross sections of the mainland. For example, here's a tunnel or a sort of mine being dug by the pirates, aiming to reach the cave on the other side, which will eventually be the fortress's treasure chamber. And for the treasure chamber itself, we've of course added tons of details like a bust, the treasure chest in the middle, which is probably even going to be illuminated with LEDs, and also I'll show you how everything is connected to the top and the rest of the fortress in just a second. Around the corner we have the next cave or chamber, and we're continuing with my personal favorite cellar section. These stacked barrels, most likely representing a wine cellar or maybe rum storage, whatever was realistic back in the days. And then in the middle we have a table with a few bottles resting on top. However, I'm most likely going to replace them with green glass for realism. A door closes off the room and leads to the staircase, connecting everything with the fortress once again. There's also currently a guy sampling bottles, and then I added this column in front to make everything a bit cozier and more hidden. Here you can see the mentioned staircase. You can also see it disappearing down there, and then on top it simply comes out. This part is completely modular, eventually being connected with a building that's part of the fortress. To the right of the wine cellar there's a hallway with a small dungeon with skeletons who played cards until they died. Just a little humorous scene right there. And next to it we added a bench in the background that can even be lifted up, although, well, I know this is a bit unnecessary. After having completed all the cross sections and caves, it was time to continue building on top of the mainland. For that I was building it as modular as possible, because in future we're going to light everything up, and therefore this is always quite important. And then it was time to test how everything looks back there, where we at this point still had the gap remaining. So I quickly added the new modules and also worked on the surface structure to prepare all the spaces for the buildings, defensive structures and so on. And to now show you how we built the fortress, let's start with the most important part, the main gate. This now immediately also sets the style for the rest of the entire fortress, with this arch over the entrance, because everything is built very softly and rounded in contrast to the quite rough cliff face. The main gate of course also needs to be guarded and has an imperial flag hoisted on top, which now leads me to my favorite feature of the gate, because the emblem of the flag we now recreated in brick form with these two crossed cannons to show what type of fortress this is. The walls we built now lead to the first defensive tower, which is also completely round. The building technique in this one is absolutely insane, but on the other side it must be noted that there isn't really much room for an interior, so we sort of